Mel, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here this morning, this early morning.
It's my pleasure.
Right.
I'm in Tokyo, and thank you for inviting me.
Right.
I came here originally in 1976.
That's right.
Yes.
And I met you not too long after that when you started your family.
Okay.
I think it had to be maybe the 80s, in the early 80s. It was in the early 80s. It had to be because
Yes.
your son after your
Yes.
son born. And I was at the nursery kindergarten in Nakameguro, and you had your son there.
Yes,
And he was in my gymnastics program
correct.
as a little kid. And how old is he now?
He will be 45 in December.
45 years old, man.
Yes,
45.
45.
I remember it. And those were the days where there were very few African Americans here.
That's correct.
So then when you pulled up in your car and stuff, I hit it off with you right away. I said, "Man, what are you doing?" You say, "I have a travel company and I'm doing this." And I said, "Who's got a travel company? What?"
Yes, even if you saw somebody across the street, you would stop and go across
Wouldn't
the
you?
street and speak to them.
You're right. In those days, I remember I did that a couple of times. You'd see a guy and he's either in college or he was visiting. Very seldom were they visiting.
Yes,
They'd be on the JET program or something, and you meet them and you see something. And 99% of the time, they were African American.
yes. As a matter of fact, that was even before the JET program started.
When did the JET program start?
I believe it was in the mid-'80s.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So it was welcome to see someone look like you, and at least you go and speak to them. They may not sound like you because sometimes they were from Africa. When I came to Japan, I spent my first summer in Nagoya. I came under an exchange program and worked at the Chamber of Commerce in Nagoya that summer. Came back to Tokyo, went to school, and then when I finished, the first job, as many do here, is teaching English. So I was sent to Nagoya. But my wife was from Okayama. So after a year in Nagoya, I moved to Okayama and started my own English school.
Right?
A lot of people don't know that.
Is that right?
That's correct.
So how long did you have your English school in Okayama?
I lived about 2 years in Okayama
Okay.
and then moved back to Tokyo.
Did you have your
with my
first child there?
Yes, my first son was born in
You
Okayama.
say he was born in Okayama?
Yes, he was.
So he would stay there till he was like 2 or maybe
About
1?
2 years old.
Is that right?
And we moved back to Tokyo, of course.
Okay.
Even Okayama in that time, I was told by the immigration officials that there were only about 10 foreigners in the whole prefecture.
I couldn't believe that.
And when I had to go in for visa renewal and such, they had so much time on their hands, we just sit around and talk for a couple hours, you see. So it was, then I saw no African Americans, only
Right.
when I came back to Tokyo.
Right.
Yes.
And where'd you move to when you moved into Tokyo?
Primarily lived in Setagaya Prefecture.
Okay,
I mean,
Setagaya.
Prefecture, Setagaya-ku.
Okay, so
And for the short time when I was going to school, I lived in Komai.
Komai.
Yes,
Okay.
along the Tamagawa.
All right.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But you're back here actually on a discovery mission. Or basically, you're doing a little reconnaissance.
Yes, I am. One of the projects I'm voluntarily doing at the moment is introduce the African American perspective to Japan.
Okay.
And I realized that it's better if you're able to tell your own story as opposed to other people trying to
Right.
generate a story for you. And also to create a better relationship between African Americans
Okay.
and Japanese.
But you did that when you set up JAFA.
Yes.
Wait. JAFA stood for the
Japan Afro-American Friendship Association.
Association. So you and a couple other guys?
Yes. Myself, Warren Latham, Mike Williams.
Mike Williams, who's still here.
He was, I believe he was here at that time.
But Mike Williams is still here, isn't he?
Yes, he's still here.
He's a
been
professor.
here
He's a professor, right?
Professor at Temple University.
Right.
Correct. And
I didn't know that.
a couple of Japanese, professor from Waseda University and her husband, and also just normal Japanese. I don't know if you remember Fujiko and a couple of others that were involved. So we were the initial, I would say, founders of the organization. It was primarily to foster this relationship for a better understanding here in Japan.
Right.
It's a global effort now to do more.
Mm-hmm.
Not only with Japan, but African Americans in various other regions.
Well, it's just easier to do now too, because of the way we can communicate. We can have video chat. I mean, it's just a whole. Those days, you were still sending letters.
Those days,
There was no
I
fax
can
machine.
tell you, to get news from home, I subscribed to the San Francisco Chronicle.
Okay.
It took over a month to get here.
So you always had a month-old news.
A month-old news, but it was
still
good news.
It was still news. That's
You know
right.
what was going by.
That's right. What I used to do is I used to have my sister record the commercials so I could see what people were really being conditioned to think.
Yes. Yes.
So she'd record all the commercials. She didn't understand what I was doing. I said, Val, in that 1 minute, they put more psychology in that 1 minute than you can get in a whole TV show.
That's correct.
Because you couldn't get any of that.
No, you couldn't. And as far as radio and information, when I lived in Nagoya, at night I would pick up the FEN.
You're lucky enough to get the
Is
military
FEN
station.
still
Broadcasting? Yes, still broadcasting,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah. So
FEN.
So it goes back.
And then you remember when we started getting our TVs and they had the adapter or something to it.
Bilingual.
Bilingual.
Right.
So you could change some of the states. Every now and then you get a movie
Exactly. That's
that you could see, listen to in English.
English. Correct.
Right.
So it was on the cusp of these
It was.
technology changes. But today is a whole different world.
That's right.
Yes.
Where were you born, Mel?
San Francisco,
San Francisco.
California. Yes.
And you grew up there?
I grew up there.
How old were you when you first left San Francisco?
When I first left, I was 18. I was in the Coast Guard. And
You hadn't traveled outside of San Francisco until you were 18?
before that, I would travel to Chicago. My parents divorced when I was in junior high school.
How many siblings do you have?
I have 9 brothers and sisters. It's 10 of us.
And you're number what?
1.
Wait, same mom and dad?
Yes, same mother and father. In those days, there were lots of large families. Our neighbor had 10. The left side of the neighbor had 9. Across the street were 7. When we grew up in San Francisco, there were large families.
Well, we're just an age, a year difference. Wait, hold on. Where were your parents from?
They're originally from the South, from Birmingham, Alabama.
Both?
Both.
Okay, because my father's from Louisiana, but my mother's from California. 10. But I remember they did have big families. There's no doubt about it.
And most of the African Americans in San Francisco came because of World War II.
Of course, the same.
So
with
the
my
big
father.
migration.
They either went to the west, always west, or they went east.
And it was military related.
That's
so
right.
My father was in the military. They came.
They could not deal with Jim Crow anymore.
And they had all these
blatant
kids.
Jim Crow, I should say.
Exactly.
They did.
So when I went to school, I went to school with other kids or friends that had big families.
Big families.
Yes.
So let me ask you, your mom and dad still here?
No. My father passed about 20 years ago. And I was back in San Francisco when he did, and that was part of the reason I went back, is that they were older in age.
A year ago he passed?
No, 20 years.
20 years ago,
Yes.
okay, I'm sorry.
And my mother just passed 2 years ago.
So she made it
She
to
was
91.
94.
Yeah, my mother's 94 right now.
Yes. And she was from, she had 10 in her family.
10 in her family.
Yes.
Your father?
My father, he had 5.
5, okay.
Yes, yes.
So a pretty small family.
I have 5, so I always say I'm half a man of what my father was.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, and of the 9 siblings you have,
Yes.
how many boys, how many girls?
5 and
take
5.
me down.
5 and 5.
5 and 5.
Yes.
And all of them are doing well?
All of them are doing well.
Oh, that's beautiful, man. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Are you close with your siblings?
Yes, yes.
Because
yes.
I mean, you're close with everybody else of color. I mean, you go around
Yes.
the world. Are they all in San Francisco, or did any of them? move out?
Just one is in Las Vegas, but the rest are in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
Almost most of the family and friends I grew up with have moved outside of San Francisco because of cost of living and employment opportunities, but
Okay.
they're in the Bay Area.
Would your father, I'm just curious because I mean, we have very similar backgrounds in the fact that we're both African Americans. Our parents came from the South, moved to the West. What kind of work did your father do?
My father was a warehouseman for Smith Lithograph. At that time, San Francisco had a lot of blue-collar jobs, and printing was a big industry in San Francisco at that time.
Okay.
So it was a German printing company. Yes.
Yes. That's interesting. My father was a postal clerk in LA. They had a lot of jobs, people there,
Yes.
and also the car factories. They had that. I forget which car factory they were, but there were a couple of factories in California. In
Yes.
LA. In LA, yeah.
And I think most of them moved out. In San Francisco, there was Bay Area, there was one. It was originally General Motors. Then they had a joint venture with Toyota. And eventually Toyota sold it to Tesla. So that's where they're producing Teslas.
Okay, so you You left when you were 18 to go where?
Coast Guard. So
Just right out of high school.
right out of high school, the first job I had, I was 17 when I graduated from high school.
So was I.
First job I had was working for Pacific Telephone.
Okay.
That's what is called a frameman. Frameman did the inside wiring when you get your telephone connection at that time. Yes. So it was also transitioning into digital. It was just the beginning of it.
So you did that for how long before?
1 year.
Did you get a draft notice?
No.
Okay. You
No.
just decided to enlist.
I decided to enlist because I liked aviation and I wanted to fly.
And the Coast Guard said, we will teach you to fly.
We will teach you to fly. In those days, you sign your name in a contract, and there's no contract. You sign your name to join, and they send you wherever they wanted to send you.
After that. So, but that was the hook to get you in.
That was a hook.
Because they told so many people, I'll send you, where do you want to go?
Yeah.
And you say, I want to go to Spain. Just sign right
Sign
here.
And you end up going someplace else or not
You go
going
to Vietnam.
anywhere.
You ended up going to Vietnam in those days.
Exactly.
That's where you ended up going.
Exactly.
And you actually ended up in the Coast Guard in Vietnam.
Yes.
I never heard of that.
A lot of people don't even know Coast Guard is based here in Yokota. Did you know that?
I knew it was based in Puerto Rico when I was stationed there. That's when the first time I saw. I didn't know how to join it because you're not underneath the. You're federal.
No. It's under the military services.
No. But I think the
under war, it comes under the Department of Navy. But outside of an official war, it is an department of part of the military.
How long did you stay in?
About 2 years. I was in communications on Army installations, but that's something even today I can't go into.
You can't go into. So you in the crypto?
I did have
crypto? You in the?
I did have a top
secret clearance. I did too, but mine was so that I could go in there and repair the areas because I was a carpenter.
Right.
And you had to have a top secret clearance to go in there.
Yes.
When they're taking all the ticker tape and stuff out, and they throw all that away, you'd come in. But you still had to have a top secret clearance. They wouldn't let you in otherwise.
Well, basically what we did is we traveled to different bases and determined the equipment, whether the equipment needed repairing or something like that. Yeah.
So did you enjoy your time while you were in?
Honestly, yes, I did. Yeah.
And it was how many years?
About 2 years.
You had 2 years. Yeah. I had 4 years, 8 months.
Yeah. I mean, you joined for 4. At that time, they were giving early outs because it was reduction in force.
What year did you come in?
71.
So did I.
And I was in when the peace treaty was signed and the U.S. was pulling out of Vietnam. A lot of people get 1973 and 1975 confused. 75 is when the U.S. totally pulled out. 73 is
when they
a partial pullout. When they started
to, yeah.
And the peacekeeping forces were coming in.
Okay.
That was my last
job
in Vietnam.
Oh. Yeah. So what did you do once you got out? I mean, did you ever get to Japan while you were in the Coast Guard?
No. Only getting to Saigon through Tokyo, Haneda. That was
it.
And only in a gift shop, I bought an alarm clock. So that was it.
You remember that? You remember that time?
I remember that clock, yes.
All right, so once you get out the Coast Guard, what'd you do? How'd your life? You weren't married?
No, I wasn't married. I went to school. I said, okay, I need an education. They had the GI Bill. So I enrolled at San Francisco State University. Okay. And my major was international relations with a concentration on China.
Why'd you pick China?
Okay, in those days, and that was the early mid-70s, as far as African Americans were concerned, the big push was going to Africa. Africa was where everybody was focusing on. Right. I've always been a little different. If everybody's going left, I go right. So being, on the West Coast, San Francisco, growing up with a Chinese community, I had an interest in China.
Did you start learning the language as well?
I started taking Chinese and also Japanese, but there was a restriction. I wanted to go abroad in one of the study abroad programs. At that time, the only programs available were to Taiwan and to Japan because the relationship between the United States and Taiwan was pretty much still intact. It was just transitioning to China in 72 or 73. So. Also, if you went to Taiwan, you were blacklisted from ever having an opportunity to go to China. So, at the suggestion of a professor, I looked at Japan as being neutral. And that's how I originally turned my focus to Japan.
Okay. So you're out of the service. How long were you out of the service before you actually, what happened? When did you get here? What brought you here?
I came here in 1976.
Okay.
When I was out of the service, I immediately started school. So
Okay.
I was working a little part-time, GI Bill. So working part-time in GI Bill was enough to sustain my lifestyle at that time.
Not married. You hadn't
Not
gotten
married,
Okay.
no children. I had the time.
What brought you here? How'd you get here?
But okay, so my goal was to work for the United Nations. That was my dream.
In what capacity?
Anything to get in the United Nations in any capacity.
Okay.
Applied for an exchange program to Japan. I remember very clearly they told me I did not qualify for an exchange program to Japan. I didn't have I did take I think the beginning Japanese class, and I took a couple of history classes and Japanese history classes, but they said that wasn't enough. But knowing me, I don't take no for an answer. So I spoke to my minor professor. My minor was world business. He said, "Oh, we have there's a program called ISEC. ISEC is a French acronym of an organization founded after World War II for students who are studying business and economics." And it turns out that they had an ISEC program here in Japan. So I applied for it and was accepted. And an ISEC internship for some people will lead to a whole career. For example, you intern in a company, the company like you, you're close to graduation, they hire you and you can work for that company. But in my case, the internship was for the Nagoya Chamber of Commerce. It was just for one summer, the initial summer. And then I was in the foreign trade department and learned all about Japanese exports at the time. And after that, I enrolled and applied to Sophia University for a 1-year program.
Okay.
Yes.
Was this your final year, or were you a junior then? Or?
I was a junior then.
Okay.
It was my final year. But I finished the program and decided I wasn't ready to go back to the U.S.
Okay. After being here 1 year?
After being here 1 year.
Okay.
Because I said I want to learn the language, and I said it takes a minimum for me about 5 years.
Right. So what about the girls? I mean, did you have a girlfriend, or did you have was your wife in the picture by any chance at that time?
Yes, she was. Because I actually.
So that's why you didn't want to go back. Let's tell it like it is, man. No, I don't want to go back. I'm studying the language.
Yes,
okay.
She wasn't my wife at the time.
Okay.
But I did know her, yes.
Okay.
And I actually met her in San Francisco.
The first time you met her was in San Francisco?
Correct.
Had you already been in Japan?
No, I had not been to Japan. Now, I explained to you that my professor, he introduced me to the ISEC program, but he had his own Japanese exchange program. So he invited like groups of Japanese to come and spend the summer in San Francisco. Okay. And they would stay in the dormitory. So this summer and the year before I came to Japan, he asked for volunteers who, to meet with the students and, show them around and that sort of thing, get to know them. And because I had the GI Bill and I had a little part-time money, I could volunteer. So she was a part of that program, along with some of the people Japanese friends I still have today. And many of those students in that program had later become industrial leaders in their companies or with the government here in Japan. And one of those friends, who I hadn't seen since those days when I was here last summer, Shigeo Hasegawa.
Shigeo Hasegawa.
Do you know him?
Toyota, right?
Yes. He became very influential in the Toyota organization.
Wow.
I have pictures with him. I let him know I was in town. He said we had to see. We had lunch. These are the kind of people that.
You mean this time when you came? Last time you were
last summer. Yes.
Last summer when you came. Okay.
These are the kind of people that I were exposed to later on and became friends.
Right.
Mitsui Busan, even owners of their own companies.
And you met them then because you were an escort. You were there.
Yes.
You communicated.
I had old beat up Ford. I piloted 9 people in,
right.
and we drive around and had a great time.
Tell them, yeah.
And these are stories that they even recall today. Mm-hmm. And this is what I'm about. Yeah. Of I had this opportunity. They had this opportunity. I like creating opportunities and bringing people to have similar opportunities to make it work. Right. Whether they are educators or business It's a lasting friendship where they can do business and they can have exchanges
Of course.
as such.
Right.
Yes.
Well, see, you're the leader in your family, being the oldest son,
Yes.
and that means you're basically the trailblazer. All of your siblings are going to look at you regardless if you want them to or not, because you're the first. And your parents are going to put a little bit more pressure on you than everyone else because you're the first. That's just psychologically what happens.
Mm-hmm.
They counted your fingers, every digit more often. You know, by the
Right.
third one, they said, "Sure, third one, where is he?" They, he's home alone.
Right.
That's what happens then. But the first one,
Mm-hmm.
you're the one that they make sure understands their feelings, and you were their first experience. That's another thing too that people don't think about.
Yes, and also being that it was so many of us, we never went anywhere. We never had the vacations because you drive down the freeway and see a sign like going to LA and say, "Oh, I look like we're going to LA," and you're not going to LA. You're just going home. So even when I was young, I had this urge for travel, and transitioning into why I'm in travel or had a career in travel is one of the facts. We never went anywhere, and I did go to Chicago and Detroit during the summers, and that was great at that time, but I wanted more. And so in those days, you read comic books, they always used to have these little clippings that say send off for your free brochure to Ireland or to Paris or something. I used to send off for all of these, and I had them pasted on my wall, maps and everything, and said, someday I will go to these places.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes.
Isn't
yes.
that beautiful? Were you close with your father and mom, or were they just of that they weren't pretty? That generation. They were coming from parents that didn't have any time to be with them because you had to work.
Right. And I guess I was closer to my mother, being that my father, I never knew any of his side of the family until really recently, before he passed. But my mother, the trips to Chicago and Detroit was all her side of the family.
Okay.
So I guess I was closer to her
Right.
side of the family.
I heard this from Denzel Washington. Gave this quote the other day. You might have heard it too. He said, "For a son, his first true love is his mother,
Mm-hmm.
and for a mother, her last true love is her first son."
Mm-hmm. No, that's an interesting quote.
Isn't it interesting?
Yes.
He got all misty-eyed and stuff. I don't know if he's the first.
Well, it
son
has
or
been right. It has some meaning somewhere.
It has something somewhere.
Yes.
And I thought that was very interesting perspective to look at it that way.
Right.
You met your wife before you even came to Japan.
Yes.
And you must have talked to her while she was in San Francisco.
Yes. Yeah. You write letters in those days. So,
Okay.
Yeah, you wrote a letter.
So when she left you let her know that you were thinking about her, and vice
Yeah.
versa.
Yeah.
So when you came here, she's someone you connected with immediately.
Yes. As
Okay.
well as those other students that I met in San Francisco. Actually, they all met me at the airport at Haneda, because that was the international airport at the time.
Of course it was.
And it is again.
Yes, it is again, right, finally. Thank goodness.
But they all met me, and they picked me up, and first place we stopped at was the Akasaka Tokyo Hotel. It was a Sunday, and we had a breakfast.
They didn't take you to the Mugen after that,
No.
right? In that evening, right
Actually,
across the street.
Mugen didn't happen till many years later.
That was that area. My goodness.
Yeah.
You're bringing back some memories. Because right next to that was the Tokyo Hotel, the one that burned down, the new Tokyo Hotel, I think.
Yes.
Burned down, and the one guy jumped. Yeah.
Yes.
And then they had the Latin quarters between the two. You remember the Latin quarters was right there too.
Yes. In those
That's right
days,
there.
they had all the. That was a transition. It was a transition era. It was post-war transition to modern
It sure
Japan.
was. It sure was. And the Sano was right down the street.
The Sano, and you still had military. You still had a few that were dying out with these old cabaret clubs.
My goodness.
And those are all gone.
You stayed for a year, then you were supposed to go back, but you said you wanted to stay longer.
Yes. And
so how did you stay longer?
I stayed longer by getting a job teaching English and having a sponsor. My initial English teaching job was with Time Life company, Time Life magazine, the same company. I don't know if they're still in business these days here, but they were pretty big. And they hired me along with a guy from England, Tim Davis. and sent us both to Nagoya to teach out of Nagoya, especially for Honda and Nippon Denso companies that were in Korea.
Because at that
outside of
particular
Nagoya.
time, English was really important for the big corporations because they were just starting to send their people overseas.
They were sending, yes.
and
plus,
they needed, yeah,
and individual travelers too were beginning to go overseas.
because they had the cash finally.
This was the
boom.
The boom. This was the start of the boom.
That's right.
And so English was needed and in demand all over.
That was it. That was the language of choice. They were all going to get to America somehow or another.
And also in that time frame, I was hired by another company part-time because you worked in Nagoya. You didn't work every day. You worked maybe 3 days a week, and you commuted for an hour, you worked for an hour, and you had home for an hour. So the rest of the time you're free. So there's another company called ALE, Actual Living English, that was an American company that was started by two Americans that came here. They were broke. They looked at the Time Life books and tape method, but they developed it into, in addition to the books and tapes, they had travel programs. So as a teacher with them, you could travel abroad, no cost. They pay you actually. And your teaching is once a month, and they were paying outrageous salaries. They started us at like 36,000 yen an hour. I don't think you make that today in Japan.
It is not. You were lucky to get it even then if you had to go to the right people. But
Yes.
the money was there.
The money was there.
They were spending it too.
And I was in demand, so to speak. So I traveled for them to Hiroshima. I did Nagoya. I did Tokyo, like once a month on the Shinkansen, traveling. Of course, they're paying for everything.
Right.
Part of the system too, they would contract with salespeople. It was like a multi-level marketing system. Top salespeople and the heads of those salespeople were, they had contests. So when they came in the top, they were given luxury trips abroad. So they were always looking, ALE was always looking for new destinations. So they'd go to Paris, they fly on the Concorde, they get mink coats, they get, those days, Cadillacs, all paid for by the company. So huge profits were coming in. So they were looking for something new because they were looking at going to Florida, to Disney World, but they wanted something else. So I bought a ticket. In those days, the airlines in the U.S. had unlimited travel tickets. You can pay $399 in flight anywhere
you want.
They flew.
That's right. That's right. I went around the world that way.
I did. Yes, I did Eastern Airlines, and someone recommended I go to the Bahamas. I landed in the Bahamas, went straight to the Ministry of Tourism, not knowing anybody, walked in and said, "There's a group of Japanese that may want to come here." And they say, "You're the man we need to talk to."
So you, boom,
So
started your business.
that started a business into the Caribbean.
And you did really well too. You're the only one in Japan doing it.
Yeah.
There's no one else doing it.
No one else did the
Nobody
Caribbean.
else did. They didn't even think about that.
Yes, yes.
You did really well. That was good.
And it was a motivating factor for me because I'm able to create jobs for Japanese that were sent abroad to work in.
What was the biggest? What was the largest amount of staff that you had at one time?
We were small, but I would say 50 people.
Because in those days, that's how they basically judged your company. When you had a name card and you showed, they say how many people you got working for you.
How many people you got working for you?
That's all they wanted to know.
Or how much do you produce?
Right. And if you didn't have a fax number on your card, you weren't in business.
Well, this started off before faxes. This was still using telexes.
Yeah, but they had to get, that's right. But you had to have that, and then the fax, you had to have that right away.
Yes, yes.
And Japan was on top of that as soon as it came out for whatever reason.
The fax was like almost invented.
That's right.
So
That's right. They just really went hard on that and took forever to get into cell phones.
Yes.
Hong Kong was killing. It's just very interesting. If they're doing it, it's okay.
Yes.
If anyone else, let's see what happens. And they could take a decade.
Yes.
Okay, so you did that business. How long were you in your travel business?
Well, I was in the travel business, I would say, about 20 years.
Your own company, I mean. This was just your company?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what I did initially, because of the Bahamas, their interest, I opened a Bahamas tourist office here. So I represented them here until I formed my own company, encompassing the entire Caribbean, not just one destination. Yes. Also in those days, we of course, Japan has Japan National Tourism Organization. Then they have JATA, Japan Association of Travel Agents. So you join these organizations, you know, as networking and business events.
Did you ever join the American Chamber of Commerce?
No, I did not.
What?
Because my market wasn't American.
Okay.
At that time, my market was Japanese.
That's right. You only need
so everything I had to do was immersed in Japan.
Okay, so you didn't join the Japanese chamber either.
No,
You
no,
didn't need
I
to,
did
okay.
not. No,
Okay.
no. But I was a member of JATA.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. A travel organization.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so how long did you stay in Japan total before you left? How long were you here?
Before I left, 20 years. Total.
20 years you
Yes,
stayed here.
Yes, yes.
So your first son was how old when you left?
My total time here is 20 years.
I understand, yeah.
I took them back to the States.
Oh, so you didn't stay 20 years
Total.
straight through.
Right, no.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, so how long did you stay here before you went back to the States?
7 years.
7 years?
Yes.
And then how long did you stay in the States during that time?
2 years, maybe 3 years, maybe. Yeah, about 2 to 3 years.
Okay, you went to San Francisco area when you?
Always back to San Francisco.
Okay.
That's home. That's where
Right.
everybody's at.
All right.
Yeah.
Then you came back.
Then I came back.
Did you bring your children with you each time you were doing this?
No, they stayed there, and they would come and visit me for the summers during the summer vacation here.
So you wanted to raise them in the U.S.?
Yes,
Okay.
correct. That was the whole purpose.
Right. Do they speak Japanese now?
Yes, they do. Actually, my youngest daughter, she, I think, is the best with her reading and writing ability. They all have graduated from university. 2 of them have gotten master's degrees. All of them are avid travelers and do travel back to Japan as well around the world.
So you made sure you put that seed in there.
That was my goal.
Right?
That was my focus.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's beautiful. So where are you now in your experience in your life journey?
I will be 70 in a couple months. So what I've looked at is how can I help improve the understanding and connections of African Americans to the world. And the world can be big, and my main focus right now is Japan and South Africa. Yes, that's my focus.
Making sure that our image is projected by us to those 2 areas.
And projected by us.
I understand what you said,
Yes,
projected by us.
projected
Right.
by us to
African
those
Americans,
areas.
right.
It's because it's to counter the imbalance of the negative. And of course, there is negative, but there's also positive. And sometimes that positive is harder to get through than the negative.
That's right.
But there are ways to do it. And if it's told by us and presented by us, and those experiences are with us, that creates a better atmosphere for all of us.
Well, see, you got to
Yeah.
experience that real early.
Yes.
When you when your professor had the Japanese coming over and you got to escort them around.
Yes.
I bet you most of them, their image of African Americans is not like hardly anyone else's. They love African Americans because of the experience they had with you.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So they have that positive image. But when people ask me how Japanese see African Americans here, and usually someone white that will ask me that.
Yes.
I say we have 3 images for Japanese: military, entertainment, and sports. And the latter 2, they only know us as wealthy.
Yes. So the point is, we need to be the bearers of our own stories.
Thank you.
And this is my goal, what I can do is to educate as many people on both sides to go out and learn and correct those incorrect narratives.
Right.
And that's my goal right now.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I think you're doing a good job. I mean, because every time you come, I know you're coming. You prepare me before you're going to leave. You let me know when you get here, and you follow through. You've never not followed through.
I try to keep my word.
You
my
always
word
follow
is
through.
my bond.
And you amaze me, the fact that you will still talk with people who may have made you upset, or not made you upset, or may have done something that other people wouldn't tolerate, and you still keep on going back to them. And I think that takes a lot. That shows a lot about your character, that you're willing to just not blame the person, You blame the action.
Yes, and I
that's
do it because eventually they realize they are wrong, and I don't have to say anything.
Right.
It comes from you. You have to decide. I can tell you that, but it doesn't mean anything. But when you feel that present, maybe I shouldn't do that, or maybe I shouldn't say that, and then it's a better way of communicating.
I think so.
Yeah.
Was your father pretty much like that?
My father was like that. We had, because of San Francisco, we had Chinese friends, Hispanic friends, white friends. He had those. And he introduced us to that. So that multicultural, those multicultural relationships kind of rubbed out on me.
But he was very proud about himself as well.
Yes, he was. Yes.
Because, I mean, it's hard not to be if you're in America. Let me ask you this. This is how I like to end the podcast. Mel, I always ask this question. Based upon the soon-to-be 70 years you've had on this planet and the experience you gained during that time, if you were to go back in the time to meet the younger you, what time would you go back to and what advice would you give yourself?
Well, in a way, that's easy. I go back to my 20s and tell myself, from what I know now, there are directions I could have taken that would have even been a lot better. I could have studied a lot harder. I could have learned a lot more, but I'm now trying to make up for that. So I'm sort of back to the future. Yeah.
Mel, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lance. I appreciate you inviting me.
Right. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to have you actually yesterday, and I said, no, we're going to take more time.
Yes.
So I really appreciate you coming this morning.
And then I really appreciate what you're doing and what you have done in all the years that I've known.
Thank you.
Yes.
It means a lot coming from you, buddy.
Definitely. You take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Okay.
I want to thank all of you for watching this podcast. Make sure you press like and subscribe. And never forget, it's all on loan. So continue to reach for the stars because you're too blessed to be stressed.